Hey everybody, it's Erik, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by two very special guests, Amira Yahyaoui and Deena Shakir. Amira, Deena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. Great to be here.
So, Deena, this is your returning guest, but for people who aren't familiar, why don't we start with introductions? You both have non-traditional backgrounds and you're somewhat outsiders to tech. Now you're insiders, but you came as outsiders. Why don't you give brief introductions into how you broke into tech and how you both ended up working on this company together?
So, as you alluded to, very nonlinear background for somebody in venture. It certainly wasn't something I thought I was going to end up doing earlier in my life. I am a Bay Area native, born in Mountain View, born to immigrants from Iraq, and studied on the East Coast. Always had an orientation around impact and specifically around building bridges with the Arab and Muslim world. Coming of age in high school during 9/11 and the war in Iraq was a really pivotal experience for me and one that sort of helped shape that ambition. So that's what I studied both in undergrad at Harvard and grad school at Georgetown, and what my early career aspirations were oriented towards. Thought I was going to do a PhD in anthropology, briefly had a foray in journalism, and actually was interning with the BBC covering President Obama's speech in Cairo, which Amira will remember very well, and I'm sure many others listening will as well, in which he talked about new beginnings with the Muslim world, about employing technology, education, and entrepreneurship as a way of building bridges. And that was another pivotal moment where I knew I didn't want to be just writing about this moment in history. I wanted to be a part of it. And so I joined the Obama administration out of grad school, worked at USAID and in Secretary Clinton's office, specifically on the initiative that came out of that speech, which became known as the Cairo speech. And the work became the post-Cairo portfolio. And that included putting together the first global entrepreneurship summit in 2010, and was in government when the Arab Spring, as we've come to call it, sort of started to unfold. And being in the U.S. government as an Arab American and Muslim was another very interesting time. We were beginning to see what's now called the fourth industrial revolution, the way that technology was changing the way we do everything. And I was specifically just fascinated by how at the time social media platforms were enabling organizing and grassroots efforts and literally toppling regimes in ways that I didn't think would be possible in my lifetime. And that's ultimately what motivated me to come back to my childhood birthplace of Silicon Valley and at the time joined Google and actually work on civic tech products, including Google's elections tools, and then made my way into venture after about half a decade at Google working on moonshot products as I came to the conviction that most of these really groundbreaking innovations were unlikely to happen in big tech. I was finding amazing entrepreneurs, people like Amira, who were doing things better, faster, more impactful. And that's sort of how I landed at GV and then at Lux.
Awesome. Amira, can you give a bit of your background? You were an activist and now you're running a venture-backed company taking on student debt. Why don't you tell that story a bit?
Yeah. Listen, when I have this question of you have a non-traditional background, I remember when I set foot in San Francisco starting Mos, which was my first day, I started meeting people and my first reaction was like, I actually do have a very traditional background, which is I'm an immigrant. I come from a very low income family. Life has not been very, very easy to me. And I've been just obsessed with everything online since very, very young age. And I mean, what is non-traditional maybe is like my life before Mos. I was born and raised in Tunisia. I'm from the south of Tunisia, the desert. I grew up in a family like my parents were first gen college, whatever. And I actually thought that my life would be about science. I was obsessed with science. I wanted to become an astronaut. And that was the only thing I was thinking about my whole life. And when I was 12, my father came to see me because I was really obsessed with my green passport, which allows you to do nothing in the world. And he said, unfortunately, with this passport, you're not going to be an astronaut, but you can be everything else. And so it's like, childhood trauma. And I kept being I understood that maybe I will not go into space, but I probably go to another space that we're like starting then, which is like online and a different space with other rules, completely different from planet Earth, and became really obsessed with it. But that was my life. I was coding, hacking, doing stupid shit online, and then grew up with a lot of philosophy and reading around me, and understood very quickly that I was born in a dictatorship and that I was living in a dictatorship. And that just has never been acceptable, to me. So when I was 14, I decided, because I read online that people protest. So I decided to just go and protest, and was not super welcomed in Tunisia, which was a police state, very, very hardcore dictatorship. So my body was broken from head to toe, basically, and was sent to the hospital. Couldn't talk or move for months. And the only thing I think that was not damaged was my brain, which is the only thing that was really important. And then, I recovered during many months. And then when I recovered, when I started walking and moving and talking again, I went back to the street and did another demonstration. I was sent back to the hospital with less damage this time. And then I went back again the third time, and then they couldn't touch me because it just became a big deal to touch me. And since then, never stopped. I was very active on many topics. When it's a dictatorship, you're basically asking for freedom. But I was also very active on the freedom of internet and the anti-censorship, online censorship movement at the time. And we were that generation that used technology against dictatorship and against government. The first Facebook and Twitter accounts on those subject matters, when at the time having 200 followers on Twitter was I was the most influential Twitter account in the Arab world. So when I hit 18, I was banned from the country. So from Tunisia, lived stateless for many years in Europe, in France. And there it was another interesting life, because France was very close to all the dictatorships. They are still close to all the dictatorships. France was very close to France thinks that Arabs deserve dictator. French government, not French people, obviously. And not only that. And so basically France would not recognize me as an asylum seeker, because recognizing someone as an asylum seeker means you recognize that the country has a problem. So I was basically just one of those illegal immigrants in France, what is called the sans-papiers, no papers, and lived there for many years, 2 years of them homeless, and I was not allowed to go to college. Because illegal immigrants are not allowed until today to go to college in France. So I was not allowed to go to college, but obviously, I had a fake ID, went to a lot of colleges. I had an education, I just don't have a college degree. And there I had this double life, where during the day, I was just an illegal worker in every shitty work, like job you could imagine. Like I did everything. And then, and at night I was this famous blogger who writes about human rights and was like very respected, whatever. So I was like famous online and I was nobody offline. But I was also stateless offline. Like I had no ID, no nothing. Like you're just deleted from the database of humans. Like you're an extra body in the world who doesn't belong anywhere, which is just insane. There are actually right now 50 million people living like that in the world. But online, I had a cool nickname and I had an identity. Like everyone knew who I was. So lived like that for many, many years, very active still, writing. And then, the revolution started in Tunisia and I was one of those very outspoken people. And because I was outside, I was able to sort of be there were no spokesperson to the revolution or anything, but I was like one of those who sort of became the faces of it, although it is really a group thing. It's not one person, Save It Tunisia. And then went back to Tunisia, created an NGO. My life completely changed. We became the winners and people love winners. So I probably met every single president in the world, went to every single big event, big whatever, had a ton of awards, stuff like that. But what was amazing in my life is that I'm one of those people in our generation who were able to shape their country's constitution. And that was dope. That was a big deal. That was incredible. So when Tunisia voted the constitution, for me, I was like, now I'm allowed to have a normal life. And decided that, I have a passport and ID now and I can move in the world and I can do anything I want. And I think of myself as still doing exactly the same thing, but in different places.
So how did you get from there to Mos? Trace the journey of why, you could have, I guess, had a potentially a career in government or just going up. You just mentioned the Constitution. How did you sort of to focus on student debt?
Yeah. So my first colleague at Mos, Alex, always warned me from saying this in any podcast or anything. I don't believe in government. It's not that I don't believe in government. I think government will disappear in some hundreds of years and the way governments work and all of that. So I just don't want to live in the past. In terms of Mos, I think if there is something that can really define me is my obsession with the concept of dignity. And with everything that touches moral history, Kant, and all these theories about what is dignity, and which is still debated until today. But my obsession is people and dignity and how do you create actually dignity and how do you bring it to life and how do you make it owned by people versus given, And that was from the beginning what I wanted to do and what I have been doing my whole life and what I will be doing my whole life. I know it already. And so Mos's mission is to tear down all financial barriers to opportunity. And this came from the story. I mean, the whole Arab Spring started for financial freedom and economic rights and social rights. It was not for freedom of expression or gender equality, It was really about that. And I was struck by it for someone who really put my life on the line for it. I was surprised that was the reason why tens of thousands of people took a bullet in their chest, and not something else. And so I knew that I wanted to solve that problem of like, how do you tear down financial barriers to people and create opportunity? And that basically means everything and nothing. But I'm a very practical person too. The idea of Mos was very clear from the beginning. What was not clear is, and then what? What? Like, is it an NGO? Is it something else? What is it, a product? What are you doing? What you're not? And I got very lucky. I had an intro to Garrett Camp, the founder of Uber. And there's no surprise that Garrett had the idea of Uber, because he just had those kind of ideas with no limits. So it's bubbling my story, and I want to do this, but I have no clue what to do. And he bet on me, he was the first bet. But Garrett's, and I will be always grateful for him for this. He said, you should move to San Francisco. You should come here, you really should move to San Francisco, do it here, although we met in New York. And I just said, okay. So I moved. And then the story of Mos is why Mos is solving the problem of accessing education, college, and solving this debt crisis is something else. It was really about, when it started, it was very agnostic about what to start with and try to put myself aside and my story aside to what really matters. What is the problem? And interviewed a ton of people. This is a whole story. But when you are, your first day of adulthood in the world is defined by a lot of things. Drinking, partying, driving, a lot of things. In the US, is the only country where the first day of adulthood is defined by how much loans are you taking. What is the mountain of loans you are going to take? And how are you going to ruin your future? And I always joke about this, nowhere in the world an 18 years old would be allowed to take more than 10K loan. It's just not allowed. You cannot get it. And here it's completely different. And coming from Tunisia, and this, Deena, I'm sure you can talk about this. When you come from the Arab world, our relationship with the US is that the US comes to teach us, here's how we do things. And the US actually funds a lot of education programs around the world.
Call it public diplomacy.
And colleges and higher education and kids need to go to school and girls need to go to school. And then mistreating your own people, and your own taxpayers and having this model that is absolutely absurd was, fun for me to tackle.
If I could just add one thing, Erik, I've heard now the story and told the story of Amira and Mos so many times, but I still get so emotional every time I hear it because, for me, I was born in Mountain View. I played t-ball. My parents fled Iraq, and experiencing what it was like to have, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but the sort of serendipity of my existence, just how close I was to living or maybe not living through that. And that's sort of what motivated me all along. And Amira lived it. She literally had her life on the line. I mean, she represents in many ways almost like a parallel universe version of what very well could have been me. And so the serendipity of us coming together, which, I have to give credit to another amazing Tunisian woman founder, our friend Emna, who connected us, was just incredible. And not only because of that journey and because of the, everything she embodies about what I've come to believe over time through some very odd experiences about the potential for technology to really fill this gap. But even on a totally personal level, and she and I have joked about this. It's actually my mom who reminded me about this, believe it or not. After I met Amira, I was gushing to my mom on the phone. And she reminded me that this idea of streamlining access to aid and helping to connect private and public funds to students is something I told her that needed to be created when I was in high school. And the reason I said that is because I actually paid for college by myself in fear of that debt. We weren't eligible at the time for financial aid, but we had personal issues in our family and it was going to be challenging. And so I literally like cut clips from newspapers, applied for these random like Air Systems Inc. air conditioning scholarship and larger ones like Coca-Cola. And then I ended up amassing enough to pay for college myself and then started teaching others how to do it and kept thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be an easier way. And over a decade later, seeing what Mos is doing, like it's just extraordinary.
Wow, that's inspiring. Amira, let's get into the product. How does Mos work? And what sort of gap did you fill within the market? Because there are lots of other startups in the past that have tried to do certain things in this space. How did you see it?
Yeah, how does Mos work? Actually, we really do what everyone wanted to be, which is I want to go to college. I don't have money to pay for it. And there are reasons. It's not like I want to keep my money in my bank account and put it on Robinhood. Like I really don't have money, right, to pay for it. I should somehow still deserve an education. And my choice should not be to ruin my future, my financial future. There is a ton of money out there. I was talking about like how the US mistreats its own people, but it's actually the US is the country with the highest budget to fund education in the world and higher education. So there are $135 billion of like financial aid given by the federal government and even more given by states. But here's the problem. It is unfair because no human can know everything that is out there. And almost every student can leave money on the table because just it's impossible. There are tens of thousands of programs. There are tens of thousands of rules. Like no human can know. And even the best financial aid advisor and the best college in the world doesn't know everything. You just can't. And this is really an absurd technological problem. You know what I mean? It's just the basic technology. Like you need to figure out a way where you streamline it from this is who I am, this is what I'm matched with, like Google. So we decided to build it. We decided to build it. Today already, Mos is the highest bank for money in any education thing. To pay for college. We have every single dollar the government gives on a federal, state, county, whatever level. And what is absurd and terrible is that no one in America has our database, including the government itself. Because the way the country works, the state, the federal country works. What happens is that California will never, ever have the same rules and regulation like Texas. And Texas will never, ever have the same as Idaho. It is by design made to be complicated and bureaucratic. So, but if you are a student, you might want to go to a school in Texas and consider one in California, but you are from Idaho, and if both don't accept you, you will stay in Idaho, right? So what we did was a lot of understanding the system. I remember when we started Mos, I was talking to a friend, an investor of ours, Ryan Panchastaram, who was one of Barack Obama's deputy CTOs, and who's a partner at Kleiner Perkins. And Ryan, I talked to Ryan and talk about that. And he was like, we've been trying to do this for the 2 terms. And it's just impossible, It is for me the most challenging pitch ever was with Ryan because he really knows what I'm talking about. I can just pitch, And then 2 months later, Ryan was like, okay, so how's it going? And I said, yeah, we're almost finished. And he's like, yeah, that's going to be amazing. So you're almost finished with California. I'm like, no, with the 50 states. It's like, what? How? Working with dictators helps you really understand how bad policy can be and evil policy and hiding stuff from people works. So we had all the tools about like, how do we understand how it works? And of course, like the US has nothing to do with the Tunisian dictatorship. So we did that. Today, we are putting every single dollar from scholarships around, like every single scholarship you can imagine, and also every single college, because colleges have a lot of money themselves. And as a student, you don't know what they have. So we will be starting with making public colleges money more transparent, and then private, and then it's all of it. We are already, as I said, like the highest. So for a student, how does it work? Or a parent? They come to Mos, they fill one application which has all the questions we need, and they don't need to also answer like questions that doesn't apply to them. And then we match. They get paired with an advisor, with the financial aid advisor, which is this advisor, like the power of this advisor is that, yeah, there is a human, but powered with incredible technology that knows like everything, like a huge wiki, imagine. And from beginning to end, we just follow them the whole year until they get their financial aid offer. Once they get the financial aid offer, how it works, unfortunately, is that most students get less in their financial aid offer than what they are eligible for, because colleges will keep the money. So because we know exactly how much they are entitled to, we appeal that, and they cannot like say no. So they end up getting way more than if they just applied and accepted an offer. So that's how we do it. And it is a very simple solution when you see it, and very complex on the background when you have to do it.
Yeah. And Deena, I'm curious for the investor perspective here. This, edtech or fintech isn't normally what we think of when we think of a Lux company. What was the thesis here from you and the Lux team?
I would say the thesis, first of all, was Amira, and exactly the type of founder who represents, for me personally, why I do what I do. As we were going through the process, I literally wrote her an email, which was called a love letter. The process of getting to know her and Mos truly was that. It was intoxicating. It was romance. It was incredible. But also, we have a thesis around the transformative potential of AI, of technology to break down really anachronistic analog industries and spaces. And that's exactly what Mos does. And so, although it's not what, the satellite or rocket launcher that one might normally think of, it's very much in thesis and aligned both for me personally and for Lux. And the entire partnership was equally intoxicated.
So what does this look like at scale? Like who pays you, or like how does this become an enormous business?
Yeah, so students or parents pay us. So they pay us $149. It's a one year membership. They have to do it every year. And if they don't get 5 times what they paid for, we just refund them. But that's like the first product. Tearing down financial barriers is an infinite problem, and it's an infinite financial problem. I believe that the future of financial solution is not going to be a bank with a cooler app plus like a cool 10% on McDonald's. I think like, yeah, it's cool. Like we're putting it on an app that works and it's amazing and it looks good. And you have a credit card that is like yellow and whatever. That's cool. But that's not the future of fintech. The future of fintech is going to be to completely transform the life of a person, the financial life of a person through technology. And for us, like solving the first problem puts us in the best position to solve all the other problems.
Why didn't a company like SoFi do this before? Like talk about the sort of ecosystem around student debt outside of Mos and why it took you to introduce this.
Yeah. No one believes I think, I mean, what I was shocked by, I remember when I started Mos, I was like when we decided to do this, I spent like nights and days Googling that probably this thing might exist, like for sure. Like, how come? Like, this is a problem that has been there for 50, 60 years, and for sure someone tried to solve it. And it was interesting. I think that there is the way we solve it is probably the hardest way to solve it, which is, one, really not try to give them better loans, but they give completely something different, like make the loans disappear for many students. And second is our client is the student. We are building for the student. We're not trying to convince colleges or, I don't know, corporations or whatever. This is a B2C, and this was very contrarian when we started it. I remember wait, students don't buy this, or why don't you do loans? That's where the money is, or all of that, and fine, I mean, the SoFis, etc., make a lot of money and good for them. But I think millennials, and I am a millennial, we were easier to fool. And this generation is way, way more awake and aware and clear about their rights and about what they want. And you cannot fool them with baby pink and flashy cards. You can do your platinum card. They are taking debit cards, not credit cards. They are very different. You cannot fool. So that way of building products that look cool and make the problem a little bit less bad is done. No one buys into this.
Makes sense. Talk about how COVID has impacted, obviously it's impacted higher education a lot. Talk about how it's impacted Mos and what it means for just financing going forward.
Yeah. I mean, COVID impacted mostly colleges. I don't know if you read the Anderson's book that is now called The Emperor's New Clothes.
No, I haven't read it.
No?
Should I?
Okay, so it's basically this emperor. Everyone is it's an emperor. Everyone is impressed with this emperor. And so he has new clothes and no one can say anything to this emperor because he holds so much power. And then some people put on him, actually, they say that these are new clothes from Paris, gonna wear them, and it's actually transparent clothes, which is no clothes. So this emperor starts wearing the thing and he sees himself naked, but everyone is applauding this emperor, and the emperor is I'm clearly not seeing the clothes, but clearly there are clothes on me. And then there is a kid, the baby, who bursts and says, "Oh my God, the emperor is naked," and that's how we know that the emperor is naked. Basically, colleges are naked. How the college system works is the emperor is naked, This is what COVID did. It really showed and amplified everything dysfunctional. And on the financial side, even more, I would say.
Yeah.
So what I disagree with is the whole debate happening now about it, where I think we're missing the point a little bit. There is a ton of innovation that needs to happen, especially in learning. But I think we are missing the difference between learning and higher education. When you are 17 years old, you don't go to college because you want to do maths 101. That's not the only motivation, apart from some people. Okay. Yeah. But 99% of college students are going for the experience, for a delay on adulthood, 4 years before having to have a job and responsibility, for creating your first network, for a lot of other things than learning. And I would say learning is really small piece of it, of the whole thing, of what college means for a student. But what COVID did is that it reduced college to learning. You go on Zoom, you learn. Okay. And then it became irrelevant because other people do it better. Masterclass does it better already. And for many students, they decided therefore to either not go that year and wait for it to come back. And second, it made it also very absurd to say that I'm paying $40,000 for this. It's not enough, I'm not getting enough. This is not why I wanted to take on loans or spend a year or all of that. So that's like the big, I think, impact of COVID is that you really need to understand why your product is popular, and you need to also price it better because your pricing is completely off. So for us, it was incredible in terms of we had to exist, we had students in deep trouble coming to us, parents in deep, deep, deep trouble coming to us, and we were the advocate for it. So it amplified even more our mission as a company,
And 20 years from now or a decade from now, how do you think? How do you think this conversation is going to be different? Do you think ISAs are going to proliferate as an option? Do you think there's going to be some other sort of monumental change that we might see, or what might you expect?
Yeah, I think 20 years from now, not 100 years from now. 20 years from now, you cannot imagine, again, talking about the education of 18 to 23 or 22, the 18 to 20 years old education be fully online. Because it is about like the human relationship, but it can be a billion times better with certain things online. So I think there is I would say if I could do another company right now, I would just go buy some incredible cheap real estate and build the university of the future. But this would still be a building, I think, In 100 years from now, we would have solved real human connection online, which we are very far from. Very, very far. We're in the beginning of, within the stone age of human connection online. Once we solve that, then education will be completely online.
What does the University of the Future look like? Like if you bought that land, the cheap real estate, what would be a real differentiated? We have some higher education entrepreneurs who listen to this. What could you expect?
I'm not going to tell them. You crazy? I'm not. Why? You see it on my deck.
Okay, amazing. Deena, how is COVID? You came on earlier this year and talked about how COVID has impacted healthcare. How else has it impacted what you're looking for, or where the white space or opportunities are for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that podcast was just yesterday, but it was really only a few weeks into shelter in place and still very, very relevant. And I think healthcare is one of the more obvious examples of sort of a forced virtualization of care and acceleration that we're now seeing in public markets and M&A in terms of those companies. But education absolutely is one of those, as Amira alluded to. And it's interesting because many of these sort of online universities or novel engagement platforms for both professional vocational training as well as higher education, they've been around for a while, just as these telemedicine companies have been around for a while. But, there hasn't historically never been such a widespread crisis to impel forced behavior change in such a way. And to Amira's point, it kind of sucked. Being online all the time. In fact, I think it was just yesterday or the day before that I read a really powerful article by The Guardian about the loneliness that many college students were experiencing. I think I sent it to you, Amira. And that informs, another thesis of mine, which is within healthcare, but in particular around mental health. And so it's interesting to see these sort of different industries or sectors that I'm looking at, but they all inform one another, and they all have to do with not just filling the gap on what COVID has taken away. But I think ultimately deep consumer and customer enterprise behavioral change that'll be here to stay. And those are the types of opportunities that I'm looking at.
Awesome. I want to return to a topic we were discussing earlier. We were talking about governance, basically. And Amir, you mentioned you don't want to live in the past. and we were talking about how technology has changed governance. I sort of want to analyze on two axes and get your perspectives. So one is there is sort of a narrative that basically, this is a very simplified narrative, but that the U.S. is sort of like, rebuilding democracy in the Middle East didn't work everywhere. I'll just sort of simplify it as that. And I'm curious, like, how you respond to that narrative. And of course, the implication isn't necessarily, okay, we should go back to what was before. Like, it's not just dictatorship or democracy. Like, there are other, methods of governance. And similarly, in the private sector, big companies are effectively run by dictators. And a lot of things that were inspired by the crypto movement were decentralizing governance. And what they learned is that that's actually really hard. And it's hard technologically, but also hard culturally to create sort of productive projects. And so they've sort of gone away from that in some ways. I'm curious how you respond to any of that, or what you sort of picked up, Amira, on sort of like principles of governance, or where you see that going, and how you see technology intersecting with that. So that's obviously a big topic. Feel free to take it anywhere you'd like.
Yeah. Absolutely. Deena, why don't you go first? Actually, I'm very curious to hear her, because like she's from
we have 7 minutes? That was a big old question, Erik. Wow.
But I would go after you. Yeah.
There's a lot there. And you just sort of slid in tech companies run by dictators. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, it's effectively, right? It's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gosh, let's start with the first part of it, which is around sort of... and this is a topic for a thesis, not a quick answer on a podcast, but on American intervention in the Arab world. And that is, I think there's deep, post-colonial implications there. There's obviously economic reasons and allyships and so much more. And so that's a really just a really big, I think, topic to discuss, and we can dive into that. But maybe to tie that back to your other point, just probably more relevant to most folks listening here around kind of governance in tech. I think ultimately the principles that that we've seen come to light have been around transparency, around equity, and around fairness. And there've been a few controversies of late, really in the last few weeks, even with mid-size and large companies that we can speak to. And I think, the leadership of those companies are themselves probably grappling with what the right answer is here. It's always more complicated than it seems from the outside. 2020 has been such a hard year. We just talked about the pandemic, of course, but racial tensions coming to a head, folks losing their livelihoods and so on. So there's really a lot at stake here. And it has shown both at the, local level, certainly at the federal level, and even so in the private sector at the leadership level, just how complex and challenging governance is these days. It's a tough task to take on, and something as an investor that I spent a lot of time talking with my CEOs about. And with that, I would love to hear Amira's perspective.
Listen, I mean, very short on the U.S.'s intervention in the Arab world. I mean, total failure, obviously. I mean, go ask McChrystal or Petraeus and tell them that they're proud of their work, it's just like so dumb, so much money wasted. It is impressive how people can go to Harvard and end up with that kind of policy. Like, it always baffles me. It's just like basic dumbness, and
MDs, remember?
Yeah. And to be honest, like, you cannot force the masses. You can do propaganda for the masses. You can muzzle the masses. You can abuse the masses. But for the masses to build, they need to feel ownership, and they need not to feel it to have it. Actually, let me correct that: not to feel it, to have it. And also, you cannot have dual language. You cannot be friends with some dictators and against others. You cannot shut up on Khashoggi but talk about freedom of expression in Morocco. You just cannot. And in this world, and thanks to technology, it's even more impossible. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is goes like unnoticed. So I'm very looking forward to what the policy is going to be with the Biden administration. I mean, I love Barack Obama and everything he did for his country, but like honestly, in the Middle East was not impressive. So in terms of like companies, it's super interesting. Actually, I remember reading that blog post that the CEO of Coinbase have written, right? Brian Armstrong. And it just reminded me of Ben Ali in Tunisia, you know? And it was like, if you read it, yes, we are here. The country is super important for the country, that we focus on economy. We have to be successful. What matters really is roads and education and all of that. So shut up. And you just you can for a while, but you will not. This way, like asking people to shut up is done. Like we just need to live with it, you know. And asking people to have the same opinion is done in every single way. I'm not saying like have the opinion of being pro Joe Biden. You know, I remember talking to my team at Mos and saying that we cannot make any real decisions because we're not diverse enough. And until we have clear Trump supporters, like your opinions don't really matter. And you know what I mean? Like, it is about time that we just accept it, that humans are born free and are made to be free and made to be different and made to not agree with each other and made to not have only one solution to things, and there is no right solution to everything. We just need to be okay with it and move on. And then it becomes interesting. What is really frustrating is, especially for someone like me, like who came to San Francisco and like, you know, the future, I feel like honestly living in the past when it comes to philosophical questions. And I think it's because people don't read. I really think because people don't read. Like if you're only reading marketing books, like that's not gonna build opinions about the world and business books, right? So unlike the tyranny of CEOs, and you're right to call it that way, actually, and founders or whatever, or companies, it is going to change. Like there is always in history something new that, what is it like Hannah Arendt has this amazing quote that I'm probably going to butcher, which is, all revolutionaries become conservatives once they are in power, you know? Yeah. And even this movement of creating the future with technology, et cetera, is becoming old and becoming in the past and becoming super conservative, not conservative in terms of like Republican or Democrat, like that, like right. How they think. And there will be other generations that will change this. Like this is just how life evolves. It's just that I feel like now we are on the top of conservative. You know, like I think we are touching a level of old thinking that is so boring first, but also we're doing this podcast while DoorDash and Airbnb are doing their IPO. It's like incredible, those things that were like such big revolutions. And at the same time, we're stuck in things where it is really disappointing that tech might become finance in the 50s or 60s, you know? And I actually love this challenge, and this is something with other founders we talk about it a lot, like with people like Deena too, like how to make sure that we look at ourselves and criticize ourselves and not fall into the trap that everyone before us fall into.
Well, I was just going to say, I love that. And I think it really speaks to why I profoundly believe that the successful founders of the future are not just going to be the ones that look like, you know, what we've seen in the past. And it's not necessarily going to be a CS degree from Stanford and so on. It's going to be those who've lived and experienced and who are generalists, who have studied philosophy. It is so much more complicated to lead now and in the future than it was before. And so, you know, I want to see a lot more Amiras.
That's a great place to wrap. Amira and Deena, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It was so fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you so much, Erik, for having us.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.